start this over again. All right, everyone. Hi. Hopefully, we are going to be live here in just a second. Thank you to the mods who were pointing out our technical stuff. But anyway, guys, I am your host, Pete Bickford. You are at the ComicBase live stream. This is where we talk about all things comic-based related. And it's the first time we've been able to talk to you guys for a couple, 3 weeks. Thank you for your patience, because we had the problem where the one thing we really wanted to tell you about was the one thing we couldn't tell you about, which, of course, is that we are getting ready to launch ComicBase 2023. If you guys were involved in the development cycle of this one, this is Project Transformer, and this one is a big deal for us. Some releases, I'll admit, are more incremental updates, kind of refine the whole thing, add a few features, and some of them are really big deals. This one is the latter, because we have taken some very big architectural steps with the program, opened up some brand new things that the program can do, and I think when we look back on this one years from now, it'll be like, yeah, remember before and after we did Transformer? So anyway, we're glad you could be along for the ride, and we'll be showing it off today, and we'll tell you at the end how you can get it and when you can get it and what it'll cost you and all that stuff. But let's get on with things. But before I get on to that one, first, let me say hi to everyone. First of all, thanks to our mod out there. Greg Hex is in the house, who let us know that YouTube had not quite gotten the signal yet. But first up in the stream here, Richard Scott, glad to see you. Andre. Andre had more to do with shaping this release than he will ever know, probably. But we'll talk about that one in a bit. Oro, great to see you out in Minneapolis. Minneapolis in the fall, man, is a thing of beauty. We're getting a tiny touch of that out here in Tennessee, but it's if you ever, grow up in Minneapolis or spend any time in there, you'll know that most of the time you're out there is punishing you for having the bad judgment to ever park your car and decide to make a home there, but there are weeks in the fall where it's just the most stunning place on earth. And hopefully it sounds like we're having one right now. Rob Weinberg, great to see you. And Brian Price, I believe that is. Ed, Brent, hey, great to see you, man. So yeah, let's, by the way, man, at some point we got to talk about getting you on the podcast. Jeff Schultz, Richard, again, yeah, so let's see. All right, so guys, let's get on with the whole thing. As you guys have seen, let me cue up the graphic here. I don't, unfortunately, have the final art to show you just as a painting, but let's go ahead and show what the whole thing looks like. This is the fantastic cover that Ms. Laurel Bleckman made for us. Laurel was the partner of Glenn Orbeck, our longtime cover artist, and they were such a talented pair. They literally would finish each other's paintings. This is the cover for ComicBase 2023, and like I say, I look forward to seeing the actual painting when it arrives in a week or so back in my place. But let's get back to this. Oh, by the way, if you haven't done it yet, so please do hit the like and subscribe button and hit the bell. It helps somewhat as far as letting YouTube actually let people know when we're talking. This, by the way, I'm picturing this one is more of the behind the scenes podcast. If you're looking for the really shiny, concise, just feature rundown, I am hoping to do more of a produced video on that one in the coming weeks. But this is one for the guys who've been suffering with us through the entire development process and want to see where the whole thing was going for. But anyway, so let's get on with it. So ComicBase 2023, the major, so let's start with the big stuff right off the bat. Let me pull up my notes on this one. So the biggest architectural change on this one is we've just rewritten the entire program to be what's called 64-bit. So for the non-geeks out in the universe, what that means is if you write applications to be 64-bit, it means that you can write them so they can address memory in the, I think it's the petabytes or better. Most applications up until very recently were what's called 32-bit. That Windows made a big deal. It was like, yeah, we're the first 32-bit modern operating system, and which means that you can comfortably work with technically 4 gigs of RAM, really 2 gigs in Windows. But there was never really, until fairly recently, a reason to go beyond 32 bits. But we did recently. We've been adding to the database, as you can tell, a lot. But what is unfortunately necessary if you want to write an application to be 64-bit is it means that you had to rip up every single database call in the entire program, which being the program's called ComicBase, you might have a clue that there are rather a lot of those, and we had to convert them from the original database technology that Microsoft shipped, which was only 32-bit in nature, and revise them all to use a more modern operating system, or a more modern API for the database calls, which unfortunately meant just an enormous amount of work on the back end here. The other thing it means is that we could no longer open up the ComicBase 2017 and earlier databases directly, because those were all based on the earlier version of the Microsoft database calls with the older database before we converted to SQLite with ComicBase 2020. So if you have a very old version of ComicBase and you're looking to upgrade, it means that we now, when you try to do that, the program will now say, hey, looks like this database is too old for us. We got to now run you over to a conversion program, which we then had to write, which will then convert it to the modern era, and then we can open it, because we couldn't have any of the old code existing side by side with new code, because then we wouldn't be 64-bit. All right. So aside from the geekitude, why do we care? I mean, what's in it for you to get 64-bit support in your applications? Well, there's three big things. Number one, speed. We no longer are basically doing all the database work, two different ways, and the newer ways are generally a little faster, especially because they know they can use more of your computer's resources when they need to, and so they don't need to sort of baby step things down quite as much. So it gets rid of a number of the bottlenecks. Number two is there's basically unlimited amount of searching you can do. So with the older versions of the program, really everything you did had to be limited to fit within the 2 gigs of RAM that Windows would let you have for a 32-bit application. Now, if your computer, like most computers these days, has 8 gigs or more, we can use it all. And your computer will happily swap things out in order to accommodate what you've got going on there. But for instance, whereas beforehand, probably 50,000 was the absolute maximum number of results you could get back from any search whatsoever. With the new version, well, we'll show you some things later on, but yeah, you can go nuts. There really is no practical limit. You can bring back as many pictures, as much of anything as you want, and it does it not only does it not blow up your computer, but it does it all pretty darn fast. Let's see here. Okay, so sorry, getting traffic from the office, which I'm going to ignore right now because of just I'm doing a podcast, guys. Handle the tech, handle the missing pencil sharpener or whatever you've got going on back there. Handle that another time. We'll talk later. All right. But anyway, so we can bring back truly huge result sets, and we might do a few of those later on. But literally, if I sat there and said, "Hi," literally bring me back a list of everything in the database all in one big grid along with its pictures, you can now do it if your computer has a sufficient amounts of RAM. And lastly, and this one is, I don't know, it's a feature by way of not being a bad thing, more than it is. There's a third-party reporting tool that we and everyone else on the planet uses. Everyone from Microsoft, just name it. I mean, as far as everyone who uses a reporting tool, they're probably using this one. It's called Crystal Reports. And you might have had the bad luck, depending on how old your computer is and what you're coming from and what other programs have been installed, to run into various kind of conflicty issues with Crystal Reports. Well, one thing that's really nice about going to Windows 64 is, you know what? We're no longer using 32-bit Crystal Reports whatsoever, and we've not had a single case where the 64-bit version had any conflict with anything. It looks like Crystal Reports spent a lot more time getting their 64-bit story in order. Also, unfortunately, we also had to rewrite every report in the program as part of the effort, which wasn't that much fun for us. But the good news is it means if you've had any problems getting reports printed, you won't have that problem anymore. It's sort of a third-party issue, but it's a pain in the neck, and I certainly sympathize with anyone who's had it. But that one you can look in the rear view and say, yeah, no mas for me. We got this sorted. So that's that one. Before I go too far, let me check the chat. I just got a note from the office that says that they're having some networking issues, and the will not be pushing the content update today. So if you guys were looking for the week's books, just wait till tomorrow and they'll take it from there. I guess they're having Dropbox sync issues. All right. Let's see. Craig says, yeah, even if you don't have dental insurance, most offices will take doubloons. All right then. Let me make sure that yeah, there's the comments. By the way, one thing I should warn everyone: I'm rocking a brand new system setup right now, so bear go easy on me here as I muck through some of the stuff that I'll be showing on here, because one of the things I have to do is I'm actually dedicated. You know how we could never magnify the screen properly to show off features before? Well, now we can, because I basically am using an entirely different computer to show that stuff on. The downside of that one, and I found this out during testing, is that for me to show the other computer, and let me go ahead and pop it on right now, assuming I've got it warmed up. By the way, there it is in all its purple glory here. This is my live stream one of ComicBase 2023. Is I'm using it's called a KVM, keyboard video monitor switcher, in order to be able to talk to the both computers. So right now you see me moving around the mouse on what's now essentially my demo computer. And the really good thing is I now can actually zoom in the screen to show you things, and it doesn't blow out everything. So this actually should be a lot more reasonable as far as showing you new features. The downside I've noticed is that for me to go back to the chat, there's a little bit of a squishing back and forth on the video image, and I hope to work that out in the days ahead. But if not, if I had someone who's a really excellent producer in the office here, I'll bet you they could minimize that effect, but I'll work it out as I go. Anyway, but be gentle, guys. We're doing what we can on that one. All right, let me go back and you know what? I'm actually going to go ahead and let's go ahead and switch back to that view right now. Okay, so that is the one right there. I'll put myself up here on the screen, just talking in the upper right-hand corner. Hello, everyone. All right, and let's start showing off some of the new cool things that it does. All right, so we talked about 64-bitness. Now, where does that show up in the world? Well, the first place it shows up in the world is when we go up here to Setup. Let's go to our preferences, and let's scroll down. And there, by the way, there are some new preferences down here. But you guys might remember that we had rows to display in grid view, and that used to basically cap out at 50,000. We've added a few more numbers to this one. And honestly, if I wanted to go higher, and we may still go higher before final ship on this one, we can. We're literally considering an option called unlimited. So basically, if you only had about 2 gigs of RAM to work with, this is about as far as you could ever go and not have your computer just lock up on you. Now, honestly, the only reason these don't go higher is because there are only a million comic books in the world. There are only 2 million newspaper entries and such like that we can put in there. So there didn't seem to be a reason to go higher. But yes, we can easily handle that. By the way, everything from 500,000 on up, it's requiring you to have not just 8 gigs, but it's looking for you to have 16 gigs or more of RAM. Otherwise, you're going to see that this list limits yourself down at 500,000. But this is all in the spirit, again, of it's going to use whatever your computer can dish out at this point. We're not limited to some artificially low, limit like 2 gigs like we were in the past. All right, let's go to some other things. We have done some really heavy work in terms of upping the speed of certain of these titles. So, for instance, like if I go to say, this is Marvel Comics Digest, Marvel Comics of the Le Collection, things like that. I mean, this is all fast and stuff like that. I mean, we don't really expect this not to be, because there's only a couple hundred items we're flipping through here. But let's go to some of the heavier titles that I used to lock up the program for several seconds at least when you started. So let's go to say like Action Comics, and that's it. That's all it took to pull up Action Comics. We've timed it out. It's 0.8 seconds on average on my current computer. You're looking at my old computer right now, so maybe it's 1.0 seconds, but we're talking about numbers like that. Now, another thing, you'll notice Action Comics is well over 1,000 issues in it. You notice what we're used to seeing at the top left here is that with this little spinny cursor as it figures out which pictures we've got to go. Well, you didn't see a spinny cursor there right there. Let's look for it again. Let's go to Detective. And yes, no spinny cursor, we're just looking at all the pictures, right? But certainly it's still building the picture thumbnails for the ones down the list. So let's scroll down to the bottom if I can find my cursor. No, they're all there. Basically, as fast as you can scroll to anything, that picture's there. So, and just to show you, I'm not rigging the test on this one. Let's I don't know, pick a random number on this whole thing, and yeah, we can just scroll up down like this, and basically, yeah, as fast as I can go to something, it's going to show me the data on that one. Um, so yeah, we had, this is we in our marketing as we're coming up with the collateral for ComicBase 2023, we're saying yeah, the grids are about twice as fast, because when we did a number of grid timings, they were basically at least twice as fast. But when you talk about things like how long it take to put in all, to show all the pictures, because I need to work down at the end of a long title like this, the answer was literally they were hundreds of times as fast as they were before. We've done some really clever work, if we do say so ourselves, as far as how to make that happen. By the way, let me show you a couple other infamous titles. Let's go to Commando. This is a British series that's run, I think it's 4,500 issues now. 1001, 1002, and that's all it took. And then you also can go and let's go. Well, let's go to say like it's not just comics. Let's go to say like Time Magazine. Let me adjust my splitter here so I'm not just where are we at here? Let me make some room to show some data here. So Time Magazine, I don't know, what was that thing had? 20, 30,000 issues? Or no, it's at Time Magazine. I think it's only about, I don't know, 7 or 8,000 maybe. But yes, that's all it took for Time Magazine. Let's go for the British Medical Journal. I know that one has at least 7,000 issues. 1001. That's it. Yeah. So, yeah, that's it, guys. The grids are crazy, crazy faster. It should be a lot more pleasant just to use the program right now. Honestly, if you guys want to know how we pulled the trick off, it kind of comes down to a combination of two things. One is, again, we really, using what we could do with 64-bit, we really beat the hell out of the grid in terms of refining how do we shortcut everything as far as setting up the grid, setting the fonts, do the row coloring, all that stuff. How do we make that as efficient as humanly possible? We spent just enormous amounts of time with timings and things like that just to get this all done. But the other thing we did is, frankly, we stole some tricks from playing video games. Let's go to where am I going for? Let's go. Let's go back to comics for a sec, and let's go have a look at something that's had a lot of action on it, like action. Okay. And you notice, by the way, that we're also, while we're at here, we didn't just bring back the pictures, but we also were able to row color, all the rows based on how much the ink, they've increased or decreased in value recently. All that, we were able to check for media files. All this stuff happened in that same one or 2 seconds, right when the title loads. So, yeah, no. So the way we pull this off, again, some of it is we're using more of your machine and using it better. But another part of it is that we are, frankly, we're pulling some tricks out of video games where, for instance, if you've got a video game like I was playing Red Dead Redemption the other day, and if you're looking at a scene with probably thousands and thousands, maybe maybe a million vertices, if you looked at all the polygons that make up every tick of the character's facial expression, all the crazy hair on the horses, the weapons and everything else, the leaves on the trees. I mean, if you were to render everything that was in that scene, it would take forever. It would take probably 2-3 minutes per frame to get that. But they have to make that game run at 30 to 60 frames per second. Well, how do they do it? And the answer is, of course, you cheat. You spend a lot of time rendering the things that people are going to look at fast, and you do that first. Anything that that you're not looking at, frankly, you maybe don't need to render it at all. You don't even need to compute it. But we do a lot of that kind of shortcutting where we figure out what it is you're looking at and making sure that stuff gets done first, and the other stuff, if there's any kind of background stuff that even needs to happen, and we were able to rethink some of that. We're able to push that way to the back, and so basically, the program stays responsive and is able to work with you the second you're ready to work. So that's where we're at on this one. And now I'm going to switch back to the main camera. Let's see if I do it from here. Can I lose the key? All right, yeah, I'm going to do that because I know it's going to shutter the video when I flip back to looking at comments. I can't win. It did it on my main camera, so that's Well, guys, I'll be working on that one for the next live stream, but we'll yeah get used to a certain amount of weird video artifacting. It's like a little bit like the old '80s video effects, but we'll iron it out as we go. Anyway, I want to say hey to Ron Lashley and Ken Fike. Great to see everyone. All right, so Oro points out viewing 2 million items at 1 second per item equals 23,000. Was it 23.148 days, 24 hours a day to view? Yeah, we used to do stats like that. Because we were trying to figure out how do you illustrate, like what does 860,000 covers look like? And just, well, if you looked at each one for 1 second, how long would it take you? And at a certain point, it just becomes mind-boggling. You just can't get over how much data you're playing with. But anyway, let's get back to some of the other things that we did here. So we talked about 64-bitness. We talked about speed, and these are not bad things to bring to the table. We, of course, let's talk about content because, we're on it. We passed probably the last milestone I'm ever going to be able to really brag about last year, which is that we passed 1 million comic books built into the database. And if you guys ever watched Penn and Teller's old show, whose name I can't probably, well, I guess I can, well, this is called BS. They had a brilliant demonstration at one point of the challenge of just humans processing numbers, where it said, look, our little our non-galaxy brains here, our little monkey brains, like we get the idea of like 1, 2, a few, a bunch, a whole bunch, and then kind of like a metric shed load, right? But beyond that, you don't really get the idea of like what's the difference between like let's just take an example. Last year we shipped with 775,000 covers in the database. All right, well that sounds like a metric shed load, to use the British euphemism on that one. Well, now this year we have 860,000 plus new covers, and that also sounds like a metric shed load. It sounds like the same number. You can't really process it because you were going from one mind-boggling number to another mind-boggling number. So we, when we talk about, well, but guys, we'd like to get some credit for all the work we did this year. One thing that made me very sad last year is I realized I've passed the last number that means anything to anyone when talking about comic books, and that we passed 1 million. As soon as you say million, everything else just sounds like, well, we went from, we had 1 million last year, but now we're at 1.04 million. It's like, that doesn't sound like anything moved. It sounds like over 1 million. So yeah, we're just gonna need to park that one and just say, guys, yep, we are adding stupid amounts of content, and we keep doing so. So that is a thing that happened. But yes, in the current database, we have over 1 million, fully priced out as well. Over 1 million listings for comic books, plus almost 2 million books, magazines, and newspapers. More about the newspapers in a moment. And that, of course, is going to grow. But I think we're all processing that the same way, which is saying, yeah, you got a bunch of stuff. It's more stuff than I'll ever have a chance to look at. Thank God those lists are so fast, because now they don't feel like they bog me down. Now, in addition to that one, we added over 90,000 new covers, makes for more than 860,000. I think the real number is like 863 or 864,000 covers in the database. And here we can get a little bit more reasonable about, like, other than like, yeah, okay, that's a lot of stuff, but what's it for? And the answer of what's it for is it gives you cover variant identification. I mean, well, then it's really pretty. I like just looking at the covers. I mean, it just the idea of like seeing that much of comic history in one place, especially when I fire up the screensaver. That one for me is like, that's just fun. I love seeing the old pulp books. I love seeing, issues of Life magazine go whirling by. Hell, even if I see like the Boston Globe from 1840 whiz by, I'm like, wow, that's kind of cool. But beyond that, the crucial reason you really need to see the covers these days, because there really isn't a substitute for them when you're talking about variant identification. And so right before the show, I did a quick little search just in the database, and I said, well, what percentage of the market is variants at this point? And all I did is I said, all right, yeah, tell me how many issues had a cover date past 9/1/2021, and I came up with a number of 17,801. That's before this week's update, so your numbers may vary slightly. And then how many of those have, a variation that's not any, that's, are there multiple, they're second or third printing, or they're a variant of one sort or another? And the answer on that was, let me pull it up. I just scroll my thing. 13,413. When you take those two numbers together, you wind up with 75.3% of all comics that are being issued in the universe at the moment are a variant of one sort or another. It's more than 3 out of 4. This is nuts, guys, and it is only getting worse. I looked at the numbers. Going back, starting at 2000 and 2010, and the curve is only increasing. So honestly, so just being able, as you're dealing with just the craziness which is today's comic books, the ability to say, like, this is the Pia Guerra cover as opposed to the Carlos, whatever. I'm just, at some point the names jumble in my head, but the George Tuska cover, yeah, that'd be fun to see that. But anyway, just being able to see that is worth, it's worth it. It makes a big difference in your collecting life. Let me go ahead and I'm going to switch over here and let's see if we can just, give an idea of what some of that looks like. Yeah, it's still doing the squishy thing. I'm not loving that. But for instance, I was looking over here and I thought, Action Comics 1B. So we've got, I'm pulling up the thing there. That's the which we would know from the item description as the Fan Expo Convention acetate variant cover by Tony S. Daniel. It looks awfully similar to the 1C, which is the Fan Acetate Convention black and white variant cover by Tony S. Daniel. Not to be confused with, anything else, the D reprint, the whatever else, the 2022 facsimile edition, etc. Yeah, no, it's hard being a collector without just having the cover reference there. And barcodes help a lot, but especially when you get into the issues where you're going beyond even like the Z printings and things like that. At that point, even the barcodes become highly ambiguous. So it's a very useful thing to have that kind of cover reference, and I'm glad we were able to keep up as much of that as we were. Now, another thing that's nice about this whole thing, and when I was setting up again, the marketing for, like, what do you tell people about the new version, we were kind of caught between, like, okay, it's bigger, it's more powerful, but it's also lighter somehow, and it's faster. And you're like, wait, how's that a thing? Because what have you ever seen in your life that's both bigger and faster? That's not, those terms don't go together very easily. And you also sit there and say lighter. It's like, well, what? And one of the things that we did recently, and this started last year, but it's really paid off this year, especially once we upgraded our internet. So we now are rocking gigabit connections up and back with our servers. Is you no longer have to, as a customer, install 860,000 covers onto your computer. That used to be just, you'd either get them on Blu-rays or you'd load them from 4 DVDs, and it would take a ton of space on your hard drive. And you no longer need to do that to get all the advantage of everything you're seeing here. And because all you can do now is you can download a 6 gigabyte file, which now with our internet connection only takes a few minutes. Install those, and that gives you the small thumbnails, the ones you see in the grids right now. It gives you those right away, and then the second you click on them, that fast, it loaded the full high-res version. And so at the same time, you've kind of got this paradox on your computer where it's lighter. It doesn't take anything like this, the disk space it used to have all the stuff. It installed way faster than you're used to. You've got all the breadth that you had before of having this vast art library, and the second you look at it, it's almost like Schrodinger's comic books. The second you look at it in any way, the second you go to, it comes to come up on a screensaver, it comes up on a, you print it on a label or things like that, then the high-res version gets downloaded in under a second, and bam, you're in business, and you didn't have to burn your whole disk to make that happen. So, yes, if you want to, you still can download all the covers from all, if you have the 4K archive version, which comes on 2, double-sided Blu-rays or 2 double-layer Blu-rays, you can get 90 gigs of data on there. I mean, with the movies, the bonus content, and everything else like that, it's a ton of cool stuff. Or you can download a 6 gig file, and the other stuff will appear by magic at 4K resolution if you've got the 4K version. So yeah, I would definitely say, having done both for the year now, and seeing the new speeds that we've got off of the internet connections, whenever I install a new computer, I always do the quick installs myself. Obviously, do whatever makes sense for you, but that's how I set up my computers these days. So for whatever it's worth. All right, let's move on. Oh, actually, let me go ahead and switch back here, and it really doesn't matter if I bump this forward or back, because it's still going to do the squishing of the monitor on here. All right, so. All right, let's see here. If you pull in, I not sure what the comment is. I'm sure it has something to do with something. Agreed. But okay, so we got that. All right, so next up in the hit parade of things that we've been doing this time out is smarter item lookups. All right, we talked about this one. Let's go back to the screen here. We talked about this one on a live stream you might remember, called Where Does It Go? And if not, you could go ahead and reference that one. And we get calls many times a week, sometimes many times a day, by customers, new and old, who are just looking for comics. Now, we think the item lookup's pretty good right now, as far as just type in a few letters and you get to where you're going. But it has some weird things, I mean, comic books, to anyone you've had to ever explain, indicia and series naming conventions and things like that too. There's a lot of lore just with comic books that it's hard for like the civilians out there to get. So for instance, let's go and look at a let's go pull up a comic book here. And if I were really cool, I'd have pulled this up ahead of time. But let's have a look at, yeah, that's the British one. Let's look at the Gilberton series of Classics Illustrated. All right. Okay, so put yourself in the hands of just a civilian. They're staring at a comic book that looks like this. Let me go ahead and zoom it in, which I can do now. All right, it says Classic Comics presents The Three Musketeers. It's clearly the name of this comic book is The Three Musketeers. You might look at it and say, well, I don't see Three Musketeers as a title in ComicBase, but maybe, sure, it's Classic Comics Presents, maybe, because that happens sometimes. Like there's Marvel Comics Presents Wolverine, so even though it's got a big picture of Wolverine on the cover, I've learned from hard experience that the real name of it is Marvel Comics Presents. No, you wouldn't even win on that one, because no, after trying that one out in 1941, after several printings and several things like that, the fine folks over at Gilbert and Publications decided to change their trade dress up a bit. And then I believe sometime by the time they got down around here, no, they were still Classic Comics down there. Yeah, so at some point, you'll notice it became Classics Illustrated, which, again, if you're really, really clever, you might know just from knowing the lore of comics. Another nightmare title like this is 4-Color Comics. And yeah, if you guys think, and I'm loading up another 1,300 picture series here, if you're thinking maybe I'm showing off a little bit, just the speed of this one, yeah, you're right. But I mean, you're staring at this one. What do you think the name of this comic book is? Any sane individual would say, well, clearly this is Flash Gordon. And again, because I'm cool, I'm going to look at this one. Let me see if I can get my screen zoomed so I can look at it. And it's clearly Flash Gordon number 10, right? Who the heck would notice 4-Color comic? Well, yes, I guess it's in 4 colors, but I mean, who would know to look at that? And matter of fact, the later ones didn't even say 4-Color Comics anywhere visible on the whole thing. But this was a series published, I think, at least monthly by Dell Comics between 41 and 62. It ran 1,000 or more issues. It started off half the comics you've ever heard of if you were into comics at the time. Like for instance, I think we just saw Dick Tracy come by here. But they're all, this is the most misleading series on Earth. It's the sort of thing of which legends are made of. We literally had a thing in our frequently asked questions forever. As a matter of fact, I think this was even in the Overstreet Guide, which says things like, "Hi, I'm looking for Harold Teen number 209. Right? I can't find it. You look in Overstreet for Harold Teen, you will find nothing there." And the answer of the giveaway becomes, well, issue 209 would be a very long-running series, so clearly this must have been something else, or it could be that it's one of those dang four-color comics. Well, this is crazy. We don't want to do this. This is a terrible way to do comic indexing and things like that. So we came up with the idea of, well, what if we had a field that when the item title, we call it the item title field, which I'm sorry about that one. There's a limited number of words to use in English, but what it does, it says if the cover title or the name of the thing differs markedly from its official designation, and honestly, the right designation for four color comics is four color comics. I mean, from all the things that allow us, to the indicia, the publishing history, and things like that, that is really how you should call these things. But we wanted to give people essentially a cross reference for the things that whose cover name differs markedly from it. So, for instance, let's look up Dick Tracy now. If I can type. All right, let's zoom in on that one because I can. All right. And okay, we've got some Dick Tracy series. We got Dick Tracy from Blackthorn, Disney, La Prensa, Shanda, Tempo, Dick Tracy 3D, blah, 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 blah. And then eventually, I probably should have chosen a different. But I didn't realize we had so many Dick Tracy titles. I'm gonna choose a different example next time I do this. Dick Tracy Weekly, Dick Tracy the Nightcrawler, Complete Dick Tracy. Oh my goodness. This was a terrible example. Why did I choose that as an example? All right, let's choose something else. Well, let's go back to my friend, the Three Musketeers. All right. So Three Musketeers, they haven't done that many things in there, but and I guess, oh darn it, I didn't update this database yet, so I'm going to apologize for that one. But if this database had been updated for 2023's content yet, you would also see, because this one, unfortunately, right beforehand, I converted over from ComicBase 2022, which does not have this field. But you would see that it has a new field called Dick Tracy named items in other series. And did I? No, it's because it's, I would show it to you in a more modern database, except that I don't have one on this machine because this is the new machine. All right. Well, guys, pretend that was updated. You'll see this after this week's update if you're running the new version. If not, you'll see it when you guys get a chance to play with 2023 yourself. But what would happen is, it would actually automatically, just by typing Dick Tracy, you would see that, okay, well, Dick Tracy had a number of his own titles, but he also appeared as an item in other titles. So, for instance, Dell 4-Color Comics. So when you're staring at, that Harold Teen number 209, you wouldn't see as a Harold Teen comic, but you would see Harold Teen in other titles would take you to Dell 4-Color Comics second series number 209 directly. And similarly, we have a problem with annuals. So, for instance, the Avengers, the Korvac quest, or the quest for Thanos, or something like that. That might be the name of Avengers annual book number 23, collecting issues 283 through whatever of the Avengers. So even it might say book 13 on the side of it, and it really might belong under the Avengers. So book 13 might really be its best name, but unless you're just a crazed comic lore nut, you're never going to know that. Whereas if you could type in, the Thanos Imperative or something like that and find it that way, that gives you a shot. The sort of thing that typically you'd have to put in a barcode for to have any hope of finding these things. So that's a new thing that we can do. Another thing we can do is let's go, and you see this one a lot with fantasy books. We had the question of, and let me go, sorry, you can tell I'm just looking at, but let me go to a completely different fantasy book so we can show off what we're talking about. All right. I like the works of Jack Reacher, the works of Lee Child. He has a character called Jack Reacher. You've probably seen the movies, kind of an action character. A smart former military police guy who goes around drifting around the country, solving murders, and hunting down bad guys. This is the kind of thing I'm into. Well, the problem is there's never been a series called Jack Reacher. Now, there's been a number of books like The Killing Floor, which were parts of a series that starred Jack Reacher, and they had an order. I mean, in other words, the events of one book shaped the books that happened afterwards. It isn't like you can read them in any order and it's all the same. So same thing goes for things like the James Bond books, things like that. There are, to my knowledge, there are no James Bond books called James Bond Book 3, Casino, what is it? What would that be? From Russia with Love or whatever else. I'm thinking of the movies, but it's been a long time since I read the books. But typically the books are named, the movies or in the books were named something like Casino Royale or From Russia with Love or Diamonds Are Forever. And for that matter, what order they go in? Well, let's look at my friend Jack Reacher now. So now we have a new thing that appears here, which is Jack Reacher, the overall series. So again, there's no, so as I was typing, we have any number of things with the word Jack in them. As soon as we, Spring Heel Jack Revenge of the Ripper, that's had something, Jack Re something, but there is no Jack Reacher book, named as such. But I can look up the series because it knows about this concept of an overall title now. And now here's all 26 books with Jack Reacher, and you'll see now also, here's the order in which they were published. So it starts with The Killing Floor, Die Trying, Tripwire, Running Blind, Echo Burning, Without Fail, Persuader, Hard Way, etc., 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 all the way down to the more recent ones. So yes, this is something now that you can go and you can find these series that essentially form a meta series through the use of this overall title field. And I think that you guys are going to really dig that one, especially with books, fantasy books in particular, or books featuring particular, detectives, particular characters. The Terry Pratchett books come to mind. If you look at, say, there was a really funny series of books with Star Wars and William Shakespeare. It was William Shakespeare's Star Wars. Yes, here we are. William Shakespeare's Star Wars, the overall series. So we're basically, yes, it was, and let's go and zoom in on this one so we can read, Phantom of Menace, the Clone Army Attacketh, the Tragedy of the Sith's Revenge, Verily a New Hope. So, but you can also tell, first of all, you see that they form a series. In this case, they actually had the word William Shakespeare in them, so that gave you a clue on some of it. But it's also nice to know that this was the actual order that they're published in, right here, ending with the Merry Rise of Skywalker. But so yeah, and just double click on them, and you go to the individual titles, and you're off to the races. So, all right, and there we are, Tragedy of the Sith's Revenge. So anyway, so yes, we have these two new titling fields, overall title and item title, and they accompany the other ways of searching for things that you can do in the database. So it gives you, again, a better way to find these kind of meta series and the things that are kind of deceptively named. It gives you that extra key. We think that's going to be something that really pays off in the years ahead. All right, let's see here. And let's see, okay, I think we're good on the chat for now, so let's move on to other things. All right, so let's go on to newspapers. And here we throw a shout out to our friend Andre, who has dominated the leaderboards here as far as corrections, because he added so many newspapers. As soon as we said, yeah, it's kind of cool being able to see things like all those Saturday Evening Post covers with, the amazing, the amazing art on those. Or whether it's was it Leidecker or Leindecker? Gosh, now I'm blanking on the thing. Norman. Sorry, brain gone. That's it. That's it for the end of the live stream. But anyway, but as soon as we said it was great to see those covers, well, then we opened up the way to have magazines. Well, then you also say, okay, well, as soon as you say, well, it was really interesting seeing all the covers of Time magazine, where you're noting things like, okay, it's not just news, but it's also great. It's history. It's great to see that, or the covers of Life. So. So then they came in, and then you say, well, then what's what's comic shop news, or what's comics buyer's guide? Where do they go in the scheme of things? And for that matter, what about the New York Times? I mean, the Dewey, you've got the Dewey defeats Truman photo. You've got the man lands on the moon photo. You've got, there's any number of just absolutely iconic things in there that you want to be able to have a place for. But as soon as you get into the realm of newspapers, a couple of things happen. First of all, the numbers explode. You're talking about very, very frequently published content, and frankly, you're getting away from where a lot of us collect. I mean, there are people who collect certain things, the newspapers from the day you were born, things like that. But honestly, you almost want to have a place for this stuff that isn't, we're not saying never, but you kind of want to let it have its own place. So Newspapers are now in their own category, separate from magazines. Because beforehand we only had comics. It's called ComicBase, so that's why we start with comics. Eventually, we had to say, well, look, the books are different, right? They don't contain comic-related stories. We have a customer who has the Guinness World Record for the largest comic collection. And when they came up with the definition for what's a comic and what isn't a comic, you had to be able to separate out things that did not contain comic related stories. So all those portfolio books and all the art books and all the histories of comics, all those, again, we still have them. We still want to have a place in our collection for them, but they don't really belong in the comics category. Same thing goes for magazines. You want to have a place for them to be separate. Well, we got to the point where newspapers also needed to have their own category. Like I say, if only just to make it so that those of us who aren't particularly interested can just say, yeah, I don't need that in my collection, and have a place to, let them go, which wasn't just cluttering up magazines. Beforehand, because of the way we drew the lines, we said, look, comic books is comic related stories, books is, regardless of the form factor, is not comic related stories, and magazine are periodicals. It's still periodical in nature, books being non-periodical in nature, but which again don't, contain comic related stories. That was the only three categories we had up until now. By adding newspapers as their own category, we now have a place to put all those other things, everything from the million issues of the New York Times to, you name it. We have issues in newspapers now that literally run, 250,000 issues or 200,000 issues, close to. And this is actually one, like the Herald by Herald and Times, which started in 1783 to present. That one actually did take a couple seconds to load. So, granted, this is my older computer, and we're doing stuff like that. But yeah, I think that one took 8 or 9 seconds to load. On the other hand, it loaded every issue of the Herald Times since 1783, so that's something. But anyway, those can go in their own place now. If you collect that sort of thing, you've got a place for them. But then let me show you another feature that we brought in here, which is when you go, let's say that newspapers, okay, I get it, but they're not for me. When I go to download an update, let's go ahead and show where we do this. And we say check for updates. And it's going to check for updates. It's going to realize that this one already got updated. Oh, sorry. By the way, if you guys don't know this trick before, let me show it to you. If you ever need to reload the latest update, you ever feel like you just want to do it again, hold down the Shift key when you check for updates. Keep it held down for a moment while it does the check. And then it'll say, hey, did you want to re-download the most recent update? Go ahead and say yes, and then it'll bring you to the screen. Now, this database, I've got it set to pull in everything because, hey, I'm demoing it. But let's say I don't want newspapers. Hey, maybe I don't want magazines. Just go ahead and uncheck newspapers or magazines or whatever you don't collect. I guess you could uncheck comic books if all you collect is newspapers. And at that point, two things will happen. One is, as soon as I get out of here, it'll say, hey, did you want me to remove any newspapers or magazines that aren't marked as being in stock in your database right now? So it'll drastically shrink down the size of your database. It'll, the other thing is, when you do the update, it'll only try to download books and comic books in this case. So the update itself goes very fast, and you'll notice that your database itself got much smaller. So that's a new thing. Go and play around with it. I think you're going to enjoy it. And also, you'll notice the very first time you run ComicBase 2023, all your existing newspapers that are currently sitting there in your magazine category, the very first time you run the database, you launch it, they'll automatically get moved into the newspapers category. But after that, you can do them as you wish. And so that is a thing. All right, so let's see. Welcome to Jet City Comics. This is late again, but I think we're good here. I think the chat, I'm assuming my main one is scrolling as we go here. It seems to be. If so, that means I don't need to touch it all the time and switch the monitor. So I'm going to keep on going. All right. All right, so I had some other notes to myself, and I'm going to get on stuff, and I want to concentrate on stuff that's interesting to you guys. So tell me if something I'm telling you about is just minutia or if it actually is cool. Definitely tell me in the chat whether this, any of this stuff matters to you. All right, so a couple other things that we did that, I feel like they're worth noting. And then there's one very big one that's really worth noting, but to a fairly small group of people. So I'm going to save that one for last. So let's first of all, let's start that and let's look at some of these new preferences. So I told you about the new update options where you can choose the categories that are actually going to form your database. And by the way, if you launch ComicBase brand new and you say just make me a new database, the defaults now are it's going to come up with a database that's filled with your books, comic books, and magazines, but not the newspapers. Because again, we realize the number of newspaper collectors is a limited group. But let's see what else here. But I think these ones, I think there's nothing particularly new in this one, but let's go to the preferences of the program itself. So let's go here. Give me just a second, because unfortunately I caused the screen to update for the Herald Times, which I believe might be the longest title in the entire database. So I'm really choosing this one well. All right. All right, so there's a couple of new things in the preferences you'll want to look at. First of all, check for updates. We talked about this before. You can say do an update check every time you open the database, and whether or not you want to get all the beta updates or not, that's, check this or don't check this one at your preference. Checking for sales and purchases, that one's the same as before. And we're going to talk about this new option here in a second about adding canceled items back to my inventory, because we have some new tools for integrating with sales systems, both Atomic Avenue, the point of sale system that's built into ComicBase, as well as third parties. And this all lets you customize your stock tracking on that one, whether it does it in a very rigorous way or whether it does it the old way where and I'll admit, whenever I'm using Atomic Avenue and I sell things and then I go to pull the order for someone, every once in a while it'll be like something where like, man, I just can't find that issue. I don't know. I must have sold it a long time ago and not updated my inventory. Whatever happened, it's gone. At which point I've kind of gotten used to the style of working where anything like that, I kind of count on it being gone from my inventory because Atomic Avenue would always knock things out of my inventory. But when I cancel it out of my order on ComicBase, there's a new ability now to have it roll it back into your inventory, which depending on why you're canceling something, maybe you regrade something and the person decided they didn't want it. And so in which case the regraded version gets rolled back into your inventory. You don't need to change anything. But we let you have either that new behavior or the old behavior of how it used to work. That's what that option's all about. All right. There's an option for optimize automatically when exiting. If you saw last week's, the last live stream, we said this is actually one of those options that we used to really recommend that you use very aggressively, and now we basically recommend, don't even bother with it. Just mark it to never, which is now the new default, because it doesn't need it as much anymore, and it'll save you some time when you're working with the database. But let's go down to the bottom, and we'll talk about a couple other things, which again I think are going to be interesting to a few of you. All right. Now, the rows to display an album view, that one's pretty much the same as you're used to. And unless you have just a monster of a computer, probably leave that one either where it's at or set it to auto, and it'll figure out, how it should do based on your computer's performance. But there's another way you can go over here. So rows to display in grid view. Hey, I stuff this computer full of 64 gigs. I never come close to running out of RAM, no matter what I'm doing, even if I'm editing 4K video on this thing. So I just threw that sucker down to the end and made it 2 million. So basically everything comes back in one page. Even if I say things like, find me all newspapers, period, and just show them to me as one big list. I'll get all 1.7 million of them in one ginormous list now. And I think last time I timed it, it took 51 seconds. Whereas in the previous timing, if I tried doing that, it would just lock my machine hard and that'd be the end of it. All right, some new things we added over here, but there's one I want to call your attention to right now, which is, first of all, this is the preference down here, automatically download larger pictures when viewing items. That's the one I'm talking about where you can load the quick start pictures and get started really fast. And the second you go ahead and just do anything with a picture in the database, it'll automatically say, is there a big one available? And it'll pull it down for you, again, well under a second, just every time you need it. This is how I tend to configure mine. But there's a brand new preference over here that says don't download preliminary art. And I love this one, because it answers it answers a firm request from folks that we've been able to well, I think we finally have an answer for the folks who said, look, I never ever want to see preliminary art, even if I ask for it. So for instance, let's bounce over to, let's go to a newish comic title. So let's go to Captain America. What are we up to? The 10th series now? Yeah, I think 10th series. Yeah, yeah, okay. I guess we have nothing here that is worth showing, um, but typically the way that we'll get new content is as new issues drop, the publishers will give us the data on things before the final cover is out, and then what we'll do is we'll start with the preliminary artwork that they gave us, but then we'll replace that with the final artwork after the cover finally ships. So like this one I can tell is actually the final artwork, but I'm wondering if I can find any in here that we still have the preliminary cover. Typically, you'll see them have the little words "preliminary art." We'll stamp them on along the side over here. They're also, if even if they didn't come from us, they have certain telltale sizes that they'll be. Let me see. Gosh, I'm trying to think of where there might be some preliminary art. Nah. Anyway, but let's say you're the kind of person who says, "No, man, I just want to see real comics. I never want to see the prelim art." If so, what this new setting does is it says, look, when I go to a title and I right click and I say download covers. Now, obviously, this is a feature only for the archive editions. So, the Pro and Express guys don't have this as a feature. But even if I go to the title and I say download covers, if what we've got to give you is a preliminary, we won't give it to you. Basically, it just says, well, we're going to override the download behavior and say, like, man, nope. Yeah, you asked for nothing. You asked for no prelims, so we got nothing new to give you. So there we go. All right. So that one, I'm glad we're finally able to. Hopefully, we'll make Rob and a couple other guys happy on that one. But that is a new thing. All right. Other things that are new. When you exit out of the database, you might have noticed a while ago. Let me go back to preferences here. You guys probably know that the default is when you exit the database, it's automatically going to make a backup, right? And so by default, it makes 5 backups. And I've got it here checked that's going to compress the backup files to save space. Now, we used to use what's called zip format, which is a very nice universally supported format that's fast but not particularly effective as far as how much they save. Let's say if you had a file that was say 1.7 gigs in size, if you zip it down, I think it wound up being something like 880, something like that. It's basically half the size. Well, we're now using, again, under this theory of let's use the full power of your computer if you've got it. We're now using a really aggressive compression algorithm in 7-zip, which honestly, it'll use multiple processor cores if you've got them to do the work, but it will compress them at the maximum size here, which compresses them about 50% harder than zip was ever able to do. So the result is much smaller backup files. I want to say that the ones that come off of my typical database are something like 380 megs now, down from 1.8 gigs as an uncompressed. So huge improvements in terms of this, of the compression on that one. It comes at the cost of some processor time, but if you've got it, let's use it, and that's our theory. And we do it all in the background, so it doesn't impact anything else you're doing. So that's a new thing. One problem that we had, one of the reasons we didn't use 7-zip's very aggressive compression beforehand, is that you need a special program in order to open those things up. Now you no longer do. So if you ever do want to go and check out a backup, now when you open things up and you want to open up something like that, now ComicBase can open and decompress 7-zip files right from the open dialog. So you don't need a separate program to manage with them. You can work with them natively within the program. So we think that'll be a convenience for folks. All right. Now, if you guys have hung with me this long, now let's get on to the ones where I'm sorry. Let me show you one last thing. And I'm not sure there's a lot of very interesting stuff to show you on this particular one, but there's a brand new report in town called the Sales Report. So, you guys notice when you go to the report menu, there's collection reports, divider labels, divider lists, things like that. We have a brand new one here, which is your sales report. What's your sales report? It's everything that you sold through either Atomic Avenue, the ComicBase built-in sales terminal. So if you're running ComicBase and you're selling things out of your shop, or you're running them just selling them to friends or things like that, it now will not only log that sale in a text file, but it'll log it it'll log that sale in a database that you can now report on and generate those sorts of things for. With the government being as intrusive as they're being right now with trying to shag down small sellers to have to do tax filings on even trivial amounts of sales. This is something that we want to get out ahead of and arm you with. And also, let's face it, it's good just to be able to see how you're doing on these different venues. So it'll produce either basic sales reports, which tell you basically what you sell, on what order, to what were your fees, what was your shipping reimbursement, whatever else like that, or it'll give you line by line rundowns of every single thing you sold on all your orders. And new with this as well is you've got the ability with Atomic Avenue transactions that as you amend orders after the fact. So for instance, let's take my situation where somebody ordered some Judge Colt comics from me. I realized, man, I didn't grade these right. I had them up as near mint. They were really very fine. I put them up there, and the guy said, no, I only want near mint. So he canceled them off the order. Those corrections also come down as part of my sales traffic, and depending on that other preference setting, they'll either roll it back into my inventory if the guy decided he didn't want it. It'll certainly regrade it when I regrade it on Atomic Avenue, and it'll also go ahead and adjust my sales reports to say, okay, yeah, you would have been selling $60 worth of stuff here, but because he canceled that one off there, it's really only $37 or whatever the deal is. So those sorts of corrections will also get reflected in the sales reports, so you can use that. Now, because it's a much more involved reporting mechanism, currently it will only track sales going forward because there's brand new tables involved with that we didn't have the integration going there. So basically, your sales life for the purposes of this right now starts in September 12th or so, because we had to make some new magic happen that Atomic Avenue did not support, or that there were no records for in the previous sales system. So not until this went along. But going forward, it'll track everything. And we are looking in with the Atomic Avenue guys to see if there's a way that we can take some of those older transactions that you guys might have had and basically write out the necessary sales records so that we can flood them into the sales tracking that ComicBase will do, so that you'll get those as sales data. It won't roll out of your inventory prior to September 12th, because we figured by now you better have dealt with whatever that was. And if we do manage to come up with all of the sales you've made since Atomic Avenue was first formed, we don't want to roll them out of your inventory a second time. So that's the thing. But we are working with them to see if we can get your older sales data to be reportable within the program as well. But as is right now, it's mostly a tool for data going forward. Now, you might have noticed, though, that we're not limited to just ComicBase and Atomic Avenue in terms of the sales that we report with. And that is because for the first time ever, we are opening up ComicBase's inventory capabilities to be used with what's called an API, the acronym, which explains nothing, it's called an application programming interface. But basically, it's a way that programmers, very simply, they're using just 3 calls, web calls, can write transactions out, which you then can, from whatever system you've got. It could be your homebrew system you're using for yourself. It could be something that's attached to QuickBooks or Shopify or eBay or one of these other systems that aren't directly supported with ComicBase. But all you've got to do now with this very simple API that we've got documented now, and you can go to the ComicBase help section for all the details on how to write these calls and what is involved with it. But with a very small amount of work, you can write a connection so that every time you sell a book on your, called a clicks and mortar from your system, you can tell your ComicBase to, that the sale happened or that any adjustments to the sale happened. And the next time you sit down with ComicBase, it'll roll that against your inventory. So your ComicBase inventory stays in sync. So that way you don't need to worry about, posting transaction files forward and back from ComicBase, which is something that, if you were really dedicated, you could make happen with some like QuickBooks or things like that. But honestly, incredible pain in the butt. No longer. Now it's a really simple thing to use whatever you've got, whether it's Square, eBay, whatever have you. Sell your books on whatever system you like, and then keep your inventory in sync. Again, this isn't something where we're going to do all the work for you, because we don't know what you're using for your system. But we did document it and make it really simple, and we're happy to answer questions for you if you're writing those sorts of connectors. to, again, using just 3 different calls. One, it's basically one to request temporary access. You're giving it your identifying information, and then the first one is to post a sale, and the other one is to post a sales adjustment against your inventory. You can only post against your inventory. You can't post against anyone else's. We have a lot of security to make sure that can't happen. It's honestly, it's kind of an impossibility. But anyway, and then that gets rolled into your ComicBase sales reporting, gets rolled out against your inventory, and so you can sell in person, you can sell on Atomic Avenue, you can sell in all of the above, and we're making that possible for the first time ever. All right. Let's see. Okay. And Richard Scott says, yeah, sales report's nice. Nice. Glad you enjoy it. Yeah. So that is pretty much the deal on that. Oh, and you might have asked yourself, the other question is, well, okay, it's great that I can roll my inventory out of, let's say I've got it loaded up on my shop system, and I've got it, using Square as my terminal system. It's great that I can roll it out of my inventory here, but how do I get it out of ComicBase in the first place? In particular, I want to export all the fields of just my inventory. And frankly, I also want to have the pictures that go with it. Well, if you've got the archive or 4K archive editions, and only these editions for obvious reasons, because we need to have the pictures on this one, there's a new command out here, last thing out here, which is export for e-commerce. And what this does, and we say basically, and we point to the APIs and everything like that, and basically say, look, guys, this is cool, but be very responsible, because there's a lot of trust for you right now. But we will actually go out there, export your data just on your collection into either a text or an XML-based format, so it can be very easily loaded into whatever system you've got. Again, we're not going to do all the work ourselves, but we are going to. I mean, again, this is for any kind of programmer who knows anything about web programming or any kind of integrations of this stuff, we're talking about less than days of work easily to write any particular transformation between your system and our system. Again, we don't care what system you're running it from. We'll just say, look, we're going to write it out in this format. And so when you want to know what the item number is, it's this field. When you want to know what the title is, it's this field. And then critically, here's the picture file, which goes for that one. It's scaled down somewhat. I think it's about 450 or 500 pixels tall. And critically, it's also copyright stamped, because we need to do that to stay on the good side of the folks who are letting us use their data. All the data that's in ComicBase is used by permission. And so we need to stay on the side of the angels on that one. We can't just be playing fast and loose on that one. But as long as you play within the terms of the ComicBase licensing agreement, there's no fees for using any of this. Basically, we give you a nice way to export your data out with pictures, consume it in your whatever system you've got there, post the transactions back to ComicBase, your inventory stays up to date, and then you also can take advantage of ComicBase's pricing and title updates to keep your collection up to date as market trends change, and you're good to go. So anyway, so this is a brand new thing for us. It's the commercial solution we swore we'd never write, because in a way we're not writing it. We don't really mean to do a commercial point of sale system, but we are doing is we're opening up a way so that you can clearly easily use ComicBase with whatever system you've got, without having us have to take on the load of providing a million, very customized solutions for people. Where honestly, we don't have the ability to enter that market and deal with the level of customization that shop customers typically will want, and the variety of different platforms they've got from technical support and things like that. We've got quite enough on our hands just with that. But now again, 3 very simple calls. You can do all yourself, keep your inventory in sync, and you're on your own and you're able to go. All right, guys, that's pretty much it for me. Norman Rockwell. Yeah, sorry, guy. Thank you, Greg. My brain processed half of it and then it just shut down. So anyway, guys, that's about it. Greg wants to remind everyone we have a dedicated message board on the ComicBase threads, so you can request those for the live stream. We will be doing. I'm sorry. Let's talk about the most important things. When can you get it and how much? All right. When can you get it? Early next week. It might be Monday, might be Tuesday, but we're looking at early next week is when, and how do you get it? Simplicity itself. If your ComicBase subscription is current, all you got to do is signed your account on the day when we announce the ship is out there, you will see that there is a brand new ComicBase 2023 version of your serial number ready for you to use. You can download the software from there, or I believe you can even just launch ComicBase 2022, and when you checks for updates, it'll say, hey, the new version's here. It'll download 2023 for you automatically. You don't need to do a thing. It's built into your subscription. So again, for the anyone who hasn't gotten the model on that one, because not everyone works this way, is when you buy ComicBase, you get not just ComicBase, but you also get 52 weeks of both the program and the titles and the pricing, and all that stuff comes with it. And so when we do a new version, you get that too. You don't need to pay extra for it, and that's going to come automatically to you. Now, if you have not been updating your ComicBase recently, this is a great time to do it. I strongly suggest you do it. Look for an announcement next week about when the availability is there, and I strongly encourage you to upgrade. This is a huge version. I think you're really going to dig it. And that's pretty much it. So any other questions? We'll have like I say, a more condensed kind of a razzle-dazzly version. This one will appear at some point, but nothing but the bullet points of what's new, not all this in-depth stuff. But happy to take all your in-depth questions at the next live stream. I expect that we'll all be rocking the new version by then, and we'll see you then. Guys, I'm off to have a beer and probably soak in some sun down in Florida. So I wish you all a great weekend, and I'll check you all out next time. Bye-bye.